In a small town nestled between rolling fields and winding highways, life moved at a steady, unhurried pace. People knew their neighbors, the local diner still served homemade pie, and the town square hosted weekly gatherings where families caught up on each other's lives. On the edge of Main Street stood Benson's garage, a modest repair shop with peeling paint and a faded sign. It wasn't the fanciest place in town, but it had character. Inside, surrounded by the scent of oil and the clatter of tools, worked Michael Benson, a mechanic whose life revolved around engines, wheels, and quiet solitude. Michael was in his late 40s, a man with lines etched into his face from years of hard work and heartbreak. His hands were permanently stained with grease, but they were hands that had once held dreams and tenderness. Life, however, had been unkind. His wife had passed away from an illness several years earlier, leaving him to raise his teenage son alone. The grief had created a distance between father and son that time hadn't healed. Michael often found himself lost in his work, not because he loved fixing cars so much, but because machines were simpler than people. Machines broke, and you repaired them. Hearts broke, and you just learned to live with the cracks. Every day at the garage was predictable. Cars rolled in with bad brakes, wore, now tires or engines that refused to start. Michael would fix them, accept payment with a nod, and return to the quiet hum of his shop. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't fulfilling either. He went home to a house that felt too empty, where conversations with his son were reduced to brief exchanges about school and chores. Sometimes, late at night, Michael wondered if he was drifting through life without purpose, just a mechanic surviving day by day. He didn't realize that purpose was about to find him in the most unexpected way. One chilly afternoon in late autumn, Michael was closing up the garage after a long day. The sun had already dipped low, painting the town in hues of gold and amber. As he turned the key in the lock, he heard a sound that didn't belong to the evening quiet. A squeak, followed by the uneven grind of wheels struggling against the pavement. He turned and saw a girl, no older than 14, straining to push her wheelchair along the cracked sidewalk. The chair looked battered, one wheel wobbling dangerously, the frame barely holding together. She leaned forward with determination, but it was clear she was fighting a losing battle. Michael's instincts pulled him toward her. "Need a hand there?" he called gently, careful not to sound intrusive. The girl froze, embarrassment flashing across her young face. "No, it's okay," she muttered, her voice soft but defensive. "I can manage." Michael stayed where he was, watching as she tried again to push forward. The wheel snagged against a loose stone in the sidewalk, jerking the chair sideways. She gasped, nearly tipping over. Without thinking, Michael stepped forward and steadied the chair with one hand. Her small hands tightened on the armrests, and for a moment their eyes met. There was pride in her gaze, but also exhaustion. "You know," Michael said carefully, crouching slightly to meet her eye level, "I fix wheels for a living. Cars, trucks, bikes, maybe even wheelchairs." The girl hesitated. "It's just old," she said, glancing down at the battered chair. "My mom says we can't afford a new one. I don't want to bother anyone." Michael's heart twisted at her words. He knelt down and inspected the chair with a practiced eye. The bearings were worn out, the tires bald, and one of the brakes barely clung to the frame. Duct tape held the footrest in place, a temporary solution that had long outlived its purpose. He shook his head softly. "This thing's a hazard," he muttered under his breath, then looked at her with a reassuring smile. "Bring it inside, no charge, I'll take a look." Her eyes widened. "Really, really," Michael said firmly, extending his hand to guide her toward the garage. "Name's Michael." The girl gave a small nod. "Emily," she replied, her voice steadier now. Inside the garage, Michael wheeled the chair onto a small lift, usually reserved for motorcycles. Emily watched curiously, her hands folded in her lap, as Michael examined the frame. He moved with quiet focus, gathering tools, tightening bolts, and replacing small parts from the boxes of spares he had collected over the years. Emily's eyes followed every move, fascinated by the way he worked. For her, this wasn't just about a chair. It was about whether someone saw her struggle and cared enough to help. Hours passed as Michael labored over the chair. He replaced the worn bearings, fixed the brakes, and even welded a crack in the frame. He cleaned the wheels, adjusted the seat, and polished the frame until it shone faintly under the garage lights. It wasn't just a repair. It was restoration, a labor of care that Michael hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just fixing a machine. He was giving someone a piece of their independence back. When he finally finished, Michael stepped back and tested the chair himself, rolling it smoothly across the floor. It moved effortlessly, gliding as though it had been reborn. He added a few reflectors he had lying around, small details for safety, but also for pride. When he finally looked at Emily, she was staring with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. "It's perfect," she whispered, almost afraid to touch it. Michael shrugged lightly, though inside his chest something warm stirred. Just needed a little love and care. Emily wheeled forward, testing the chair. It rolled so easily that she laughed aloud, the sound bubbling up like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her laughter filled the garage, echoing off the walls in a way Michael hadn't heard in years. He found himself smiling without even realizing it. That sound, that pure expression of joy, felt like a gift. Before leaving, Emily paused at the door and looked back at him. Her eyes shone with gratitude that words alone couldn't hold. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't just fix my chair, you gave me a little freedom back." Michael froze at her words, something shifting inside him. He had spent years fixing engines that roared, trucks that carried weight, cars that sped down highways. But never had he repaired something that mattered this much. Emily's chair wasn't just a machine. It was her lifeline to the world, her chance at independence, her connection to life beyond limitations. And he had helped give that back to her. That night, long after he had closed the garage and walked home, Michael couldn't shake Emily's words from his mind. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the uneaten dinner in front of him. His son, Tyler, sat across the table scrolling on his phone, barely speaking. Usually, Michael would let the silence linger, but tonight he cleared his throat and said, "You know, I fixed a wheelchair today." Tyler glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "A wheelchair? Yeah," Michael said slowly, recounting the story of Emily and her broken chair. As he spoke, he saw something shift in his son's expression. Tyler actually listened, setting his phone aside. It was the first real conversation they had shared in weeks. For a brief moment, the walls between them lowered. A story about kindness had opened a door that grief had long kept shut. Michael went to bed that night with a heaviness lifted from his chest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of purpose. Fixing Emily's wheelchair had reminded him that repairing machines was only part of his gift. Maybe, just maybe, he was meant to repair something far greater, the broken spaces in people's lives, including his own.